Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having an amazing day. Let's start things out with AMD, shall we? Because the company have somewhat quietly launched an RX 5300. And this is a very interesting GPU because it's essentially based on the Navi 14 GPU architecture, so exactly the same thing as the RX 5500 XT. Indeed, it even features the same number of streaming processors as the 5500, 1408 to be precise, and indeed even the board design, from what we can gather here, is still identical. It's D332 for those who are so inclined. In fact, with just a quick glance, you may even think to yourself, the memory configuration looks the same as well. It's still got 14 Gbps memory modules, but this is not the case. The actual difference is that the memory bus is narrower. It's only 96-bit, and this, of course, also means that the amount of memory on this card is just 6 gigabytes. We also have a few small changes too, for the clock frequency. Once again, AIB models can have higher clock frequencies and so on, but the reference design has a 200 megahertz lower peak speed for the 5300 compared to the 5500 XT, and the boost frequency is 1445 for the 5300, and the 5500 is 1717. Of course, these also mean the game clock for AMD's own verbiage. There's also several slides that AMD have actually released for this, and I'll plonk a couple of them on screen. The most telling is that they are comparing this against the GTX 1650. And the 1650 is a reasonable card. It's, of course, based on Turing, but the only real negative in the there's a couple of negatives with the 5300 actually. The first is it's got a TBP of 100 watts, which means it cannot just be powered by PCIe alone. You will need an additional connector. The second negative is that it only has 3 gigabytes of memory, and I kind of find this funny, because it was only a few months ago that AMD were pushing that PC gaming actually requires more memory now. And they were really pushing the fact that 4 gigabytes was kind of like the entry point for gaming. In fact, I actually got a couple of emails as a member of the press, and there was even a community blog post as well, Game Beyond 4 gigabytes, and it was published back in May of course, this year. Naturally, as games become more complicated and higher resolution textures and other assets are being used, well, basically, it does start to eat up VRAM, and we won't even mention anomalies like Flight Simulator. This is probably going to be more an OEM model. It doesn't look like at the moment, at least as of the research I've done so far, there are cards which are going to be for outside of OEM. And if you're playing games such as like Dota, Counter-Strike, or willing to make some concessions on, let's say, texture settings or what have you, this is still going to be a fairly decent card, but naturally it still has the cuts in the amount of memory, and because also it's a narrower bus, the bandwidth too sees a reduction. It's only 168 gigabytes per second versus 224. I would probably imagine that most games will be fine at kind of mid to high settings at 1080p, but this is certainly not going to be a card like the 5500 XT, which I've actually reviewed on the channel, and honestly, the 5500 is a pretty decent option, but personally speaking, I think that the RX 580 is possibly better value. I say that because the 580s actually have more RAM. They obviously have 2 gigabytes additional. Furthermore, the 580, assuming you can kind of do fairly well with deals, it's really cheap. So, you could check out my review where I compare the two. But my personal opinion, the 5500 XT is a nice GPU. And I personally feel that at the moment in the RDNA 1 lineup, the 5600 XT is probably the best value. But moving on, and we have a crap ton, that is a technical measurement, just so that we're aware, of more leaks actually for the RTX 30 series. Well, that was a terrible sentence, but there we go. Anyhow, we have an actual image of the GA102. This seems to be a render from Zotac, and credit, of course, to videocards.com for this one. It is utilising the GA102 core, and this sucker, which is the Zotac RTX Trinity, is just a monster when it comes to power delivery too. There are 20 power stages on this. It's possible that the actual real PCB isn't the same thing as this render, and we also have a lack of NVLink. Leaks we've seen previously did for quite a while now hint that only the RTX 3090 would receive the NVLink. So this essentially means that it's almost certainly going to be the RTX 3080. However, then the number of memory modules doesn't seem to match either. So it is just a render. So this is just kind of a bonus piece of NVIDIA news. What I really want to focus on are lots of leaks for the NVIDIA RTX 3080 and 3090 with several specifications confirmed. This pretty much confirms now the specs, because unless someone has just photoshopped everything here, and I think it's very unlikely. Again, videocards.com do a really good job at verifying sources as well. I think we can basically say that many things are confirmed. The first is that, again, it says that the process technology is 7nm. Unfortunately, as of the time I'm recording this, we do not know if it's Samsung or TSMC. If it's true, and it seems like it is, that it is 7nm, that would be, well, very interesting, because for a long-ass time we did think it was 8nm. But, whatever. I mean, I get lots of technical people that the process is important, but I think for the majority of you, it's just the raw specs of this thing. What can we expect? Well, of course, the answer is lots of performance. Both the 3090 and 3080 have had their specs leaked. I won't go through all of them as exhaustively as yesterday, because the specs are basically identical. But again, we have 5248 CUDA cores confirmed with 24 gigs of RAM. And with the 3080, it's 3352 and again 10 gigabytes of RAM. So these cards, it seems from what we're reading that the 3080 is being the card that Nvidia are pushing. After all, the card should quite easily outperform the 2080 Ti, and naturally the card is also the cheaper option, he says, tentatively to call $800 cheaper. But not only, of course, does it have more memory bandwidth, and also we have improvements to, naturally, the architecture itself. But once again, we see mention of both second-generation ray tracing cores and third-generation tensor cores. Unfortunately, as of the time that I'm once again reading all of this, there is no solid information exactly what that nets us. With luck, the improvements in hardware-based ray tracing are sizable. I'm personally hoping for at least a 50% performance improvement. If that's the case, then games like Control would look absolutely beautiful. And I suspect that the 3080 in native resolution at 1440p would easily be able to push high refresh rates in something like Control without DLSS enabled and with hardware-based ray tracing enabled. But I think DLSS is probably going to continue to evolve anyway, and personally, I actually prefer to have DLSS enabled and then but DLSS 2, not so much DLSS 1. I'd prefer to have DLSS 2 enabled and have the higher performance and higher frame rates anyway. I realise that not everyone feels like that, but that's my personal preference. So, yeah, I think Nvidia are basically ready to launch these things. It's obvious at this point that manufacturers have been briefed, the GPUs have been produced. Hopefully, there's not a massive shortage of them. The only thing that we really need, other than the prices of these GPUs, is just to know now the official launch schedule. Oh, and I guess, of course, the performance as well. But, yeah. I think a big question for a lot of folks, though, is let's even assume that the leaked prices are wrong. Like, let's just say they are, and the 3090 is like $1,200 US. It's very unlikely that this is the case, but let's go with Dreamland Disney scenario here, and we can see Mickey, Donald, and Goofy, and they're dancing down the street together, and it's all, an amazing time. So let's just say, hypothetically, if that's the case, and these cards are massively faster, as rumoured, than the 2080 Ti, as well as, of course, other Turing cards. Like, rumours and benchmarks we've seen is 50-70% faster than the previous generation. So let's assume best case scenario, like dream scenario. The question is, do you still buy it because of RDNA 2? That's a very difficult question, honestly. And it's the problem of RDNA 2 being a little later to the show. It basically means you have to kind of guess. Now, obviously, if you like the Nvidia ecosystem, then great, good for you, go for it. But if you're not super into the Nvidia ecosystem, if you don't have, for example, a G-Sync monitor, and maybe you don't rely on like a specific thing from Nvidia, then it becomes a lot more arguable. And given we don't know what AMD are going to be charging for their cards, and we don't know the performance yet, we can make some educated guesses based upon 80 compute units with a even modest increase in clock frequency, even if you say it's a 10% increase in clock frequency, which I personally don't believe. I think it's going to be a bit higher than that. But let's just say a modest increase in clock frequency and a small IPC gain. It's very difficult to imagine that these cards, the next generation of RDNA, the 6000 series, won't stomp the RTX 2080 and other GPUs. So if they can do that, but also be cheaper, it kind of is interesting. And naturally, this also brings us another question. Do you buy Ampere at launch, or do you wait for RDNA 2 anyway? Because Papa Jansen may decide to counter with either price reductions or, more likely, I feel, other cards. I think that there's a very good possibility that we will see something like a 3080 Ti launch later on as well. And of course, we've also seen a lot of rumours that there will be a 3080 with 20 gigabytes of memories. So yeah, it's a very interesting time in GPUs. I suspect that this is probably going to be one of the more interesting graphics card launches in a long time. The last time I was actually this excited was actually Turing, because of the idea of hardware-based ray tracing. I was like super into that. But honestly, I haven't followed graphics this closely since, like, I don't know, maybe like some of the earlier Radeon cards. I think one of the launches that really got me hyped back in the day was like the Radeon 9700 Pros. I was super hyped about those. And of course, like the 8800 series from Nvidia. Like, I'm really hyped about these launches. And now we're going to mosey over to Sony, as there is a fascinating report, a financial report, and this is actually from Sony themselves. So this is not hearsay, this is not based upon conjecture or what someone's heard through the grapevine. This is a report from Sony. And of course, this is aiming to promote confidence with their investors. I'm going to read this verbatim. It's a fairly short quote. There's lots of corporate verbiage here, but we'll get through it. SIE aims to achieve robust revenue growth by accelerating the virtuous cycle. I'm sorry, that's an amazing term. That has been established for the PlayStation platform. This entails increasing active users and playtime, enhancing network services, and reinforcing content IP so that consumers select the PlayStation as their platform of choice. Targeted outcomes include the growth in active users, strong retention, and shorter cash conversion cycles, from which expanded cash flow can be expected. We will explore expanding our first-party titles to the PC platform in order to promote future growth in our profitability. End quote. So, if you've been watching the channel for a while, first of all, thanks very much. Second of all, my commiserations to you. You'll know that one of the things that I've said is that I believe that the real winner for the next generation is probably going to be the PC. And you might recall that Bloodborne has all but now been confirmed to be ported to the PC. There was a fellow YouTuber, I don't remember the person's name, I apologise, who actually had really good information that Bloodborne was being tested for the PC. It was also being tested for the PlayStation 5. And also, well, basically confirmed it myself because I had heard that Bloodborne was being ported to the PC. However, at the time I'd been asked to not say anything, which, you know, it is what it is. Sometimes people tell you stuff, but then ask you to not say anything. And I'm pretty damn sure from what I'm hearing through the grapevine that Sony for a while now have been planning to bring more games over to the PC. We've just had Horizon Zero Dawn, which did have some technical issues. I think they've been largely addressed with a patch, although I haven't actually tried the game recently, to be really honest with you. I've been playing a few other things. And I have to say that the game, for me anyway, worked pretty flawlessly. I've only tested it mostly with an RX 5600 XT, which is the card I had in there because I was reviewing it. And it worked fairly well for me at 1440p. Frame rate was pretty decent, and it looked pretty damn gorgeous as a game. I haven't tested it with a higher end card like a 2080 Ti or whatever yet, though. But I think the game did do pretty well. It's obvious that Sony studios were kind of cutting their teeth, figuring out how to fully utilise the PC platform. But my point is that I don't think Sony are going to be doing simultaneous releases. It's not going to be a Microsoft strategy. We're not going to see Gear 6 or whatever releasing simultaneously for both the PC and the PlayStation 5. But I do believe that select games will receive ports, likely 6 to 12 months afterwards. A great example would be something like God of War. I'm not confirming God of War, it's just the game that popped to mind, because it's a strong narrative experience and Sony can use that to push other games on their platform. I don't think that there will be like a long period of time for all releases. I think in general, we're going to see a 6 to 12 months delay. So obviously this just makes sense for Sony. Look, I get the fact that 12 months is still quite a long ass time to play a game, but the thing is, as a PC gamer, you've basically got all of the Xbox stuff, you've got pretty much all AAA games, and so waiting to, you know, play a PlayStation game is fine for most people, because it's kind of like, you probably, for someone who has a high-end PC and is happy to wait to play the game, they probably wouldn't be necessarily convinced to plonk down the money to buy a PlayStation 5 anyway. And I know people like that. I know quite a few people who are PC gamers who want to buy a PlayStation 5 because they don't want to wait. But I also have friends who are heavily into the PC platform, and it doesn't matter how the games on the PlayStation 5 look, it doesn't matter how they play, it doesn't matter if they never came to the PC, they would not buy the PlayStation 5, not because they hate it, not because it's like EU console, but it's just not how they want to play. They prefer PC, it's what they like, and it is what it is, of course. So I think that this is a good move from Sony, honestly. I think it's the smartest option. It increases the revenue to their platform, which is good. It increases the knowledge of their IPs, which is also really good, of course. And it does, in my opinion, make a lot of sense given the moves that Microsoft are making too. I think this is the best move that Sony can make. And obviously, there is a ton of cool IPs for Sony. And another thing we do pretty much know at this point is that Sony are pushing console exclusive with a lot of the third-party studios. So, for example, that would mean a game would probably launch simultaneously-ish on the PlayStation as well as PC. There may be some delays. So this is going to be a very interesting console generation. I'm still very much looking forward to seeing what Microsoft bring as we finally learn more about the Lockhart system. I'm still very interested to see what Lockhart is capable of. Obviously, we've heard at this point that it's a diskless console. And I think that if you're not a PC gamer, a really good gaming solution for the next generation, assuming you don't want to cough up a ton of money, would actually be to pick up Lockhart if you, once again, are not like that focused on 4K, and pick up a PlayStation 5 if you prefer Sony as your primary means of gaming. If you prefer Microsoft, then obviously you're going to have to pick up a Series X and a PlayStation 5. I think this is really good, though. From my point of view, it's all about choice. And I think giving people options on how to play games is only ever a good thing. But with that said, thank you very much for watching the video. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.